Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Eddie Liger Power Hour. I'm your host, Eddie Liger, here with my co-host, Ivan Drago, who has a message for the capitalists and for the bourgeoisie and for the imperialists and those who hold humanity back and profit off of regime change wars and profit off of healthcare and other human necessities like food and water. We must break them. We must break the capitalist system in order for a new and better system of the future to come about, to flourish, and to bring humanity into the future. So we're going to talk about that today, as well as some specific topics like the passing of the great journalist and filmmaker John Pilger. Rest in power to John Pilger. We're going to be talking about how giant equity firms are buying up more and more American hospitals and cutting into American healthcare, lowering costs to try and increase income. And we will be talking about the great Palestinian journalist, liberation fighter, author, novelist, and political tactician, Marxist-Leninist, Ghassan Kanafani, who was tragically killed by the Israeli Mossad, Israeli intelligence, in a car bombing. We're going to be talking about his book on Zionist literature. So it's a full stream today, packed with information, packed with fun topics. I'm ready to get into it, and we're going to do that right after the intro. What's up, everyone? I hope everybody is having a good year. I hope everybody's excited to be in 2024, the year of the American Socialist Revolution. Fingers crossed. First of all, before we get into this, well, I do want to say I would have made a tribute to John Pilger earlier, but I was taking the last couple days off for New Year's and was doing things with friends, so I missed that one of the greatest journalists of our voice crack, one of the greatest journalists of our time, John Pilger, passed away. So we're going to do a tribute to him, and I'll show you guys the tribute to him that I made on my TikTok as well. But I hope everybody's excited for 2024. I hope everybody's ambitious, optimistic, and happy going into 2024. I want to ask the chat quickly, what are people's New Year's resolutions? I know the resolutions are kind of corny, because for the most part, you're just going to do the same stuff you did last year. It's hard to, drastically change. But does anyone have any New Year's resolutions? Mine, and I want people to hold me accountable to this, no more energy drinks, okay? I'm switching to straight coffee. My sweet grandmother got me this mug that says "Feeling Festive," and my uncle, who is a two-time national champ in wrestling, so he knows his stuff. He got me another mug that said "Son of a Nutcracker." Okay, these are perfect for making coffee. Plus, my mom got me coffee for Christmas. My family is telling me something. The universe is telling me something. Stop doing these energy drinks. You're gonna give yourself a heart attack. It's time to switch to coffee. So that's my New Year's resolution. Nothing too drastic, but I will say, especially after a long weekend or a wild weekend, I'm kind of dragging today a little bit without my energy drinks. I don't have the same just intense energy, but that's all right. Quit smoking and figure out how to make content again. There you go. That's a good New Year's resolution. I'm going to have my first amateur fight this year. Oh, that's sweet. That is badass, actually. Best of luck, comrade. I hope you're training hard and have some good coaches. Read more on Marxism, eat better, waste less time. Yes, I think that could be good goals for all of us. I think we could all do that. I think we could all read a little bit more Marx, eat a little better, waste less time. Yeah, that's my overall goal is to eat a little better and take care of my diet a little bit better this year because I work really, really hard. And, I'm very, very busy. But a lot of times I'll just pound energy drinks and other unhealthy things to try and get through the day. And that's what I don't want to do. I want to be more healthy. I want to read more and get more politically active in my area. Also, less soda and more tea. I love it. You basically have the same one as me in relation to drinking healthier drinks. But yeah, agree. We could all get more politically active and read more, as Julie said. Yeah, and it's a little bit of a task to read philosophy and read Marx. It's not always the easiest reading. Like I'm reading Lenin's biography right now, and this is like a book I can't really put it down. It's easy to read a biography because it's like a narrative. It's a story of someone's life. It almost reads sort of like a fiction. But like theory can be tough, if it's not your thing, especially so. But it's good for all of us to sit down and do the hard work of learning Marxism. Finish Grover Furr's Blood Lies. There you go. That's a good one. Check your subscriptions. I will. Your voice cracked, Eddie. You'll never make it into the White House now, for sure. I mean, with some of the gaffes that Joe Biden has had, I think I can still make it. How old am I now? We have 9 years, folks, before I can run for president. Before I can go up on the debate stage wearing this shirt and say the future of America is communism and you all need to accept it now. So 9 years and then that will be happening. But read more I want to read more Marx, Engels, Lenin, etc. this year. Yes, great idea. Read Lenin and Engels are much easier in my opinion. So yeah, make it through college alive. There you go. Never to be frightened again. I don't know if that's possible, but best of luck. Take fitness more seriously and educate myself more. A video I did recently has been flooded with anti-communists, and better educated I am, the better I can counter their nonsense. Absolutely. And okay, I don't know if people know this, but the TikTok account for Midwestern Marx, which jump-started the entire institute, which wouldn't, the institute wouldn't be what it is without the original TikTok success. Those videos, my original TikTok videos, would get flooded with anti-communists and with conservatives. Saying communism, stupid, vuvuzuela, no iPhone, socialism is when no iPhone. Just the dumbest arguments ever. But that boosts you in the algorithm, right? Because TikTok or Facebook or whatever platform sees that people are commenting on your videos, right? And whether they're negative or not, that boosts them in the algorithm. So what started happening was I would get all these conservatives and anti-communists and angry people who would come on my video. And, like you're saying here, if you know what you're talking about, if you're well read on what you're talking about, you don't care if they argue against you. You can just argue back. You can just clap back at them. But that would then, all these angry conservatives would come and leave comments, and then that would boost the video. It would get on people's algorithm. It'd get on people's For You page. And then the videos would blow up, and then leftists or socialists and whoever would find it as well. And a lot of young people who didn't, believe the anti-communist myths they've been fed their entire lives. So you can use that anger against them, right? As long as you're thick-skinned and you know what you're talking about and you don't allow your feelings to get hurt by the comments, you can use that against them. And as you're saying, you can respond to their arguments and use them as teaching moments. I was talking to someone who watches my videos this weekend for New Year's, or a friend of mine was talking to them for me. And the person said, they're not a socialist or anything. They said, I like Eddie's videos. I don't always agree, but what I do love is how he destroys people in the comments. Is how he just tears people to shreds. So, you can use that drama to bring attention to your videos and bring attention to the topics that you think are important. You just got to have thick skin and make sure that, you're standing on facts. Make sure that you're standing on business. I'm sorry. Civilize the mind, yes, and make savage the body, like Ivan Drago. I want to work on my posture. Me too. Dude, I think wrestling's kind of destroyed it, though. I went to a chiropractor the other day, which I got for free. Shout out to him. But he's like, all you wrestlers are hunched over because the normal wrestling stance is here, right? So I've been here my whole life. It just makes it hard to keep your shoulders back. But that's why I got this nice chair. We're working on it. I'm probably going to look like the hunchback of Notre Dame when I'm 80. Get my fellow longshore workers more organized to stand up to the shipping cartels. Badass. Base. That's the most important job in a country. People who are in workplaces like that, getting those workplaces more organized. That is the most important thing you could do. Yeah, honestly, and I mean that honestly. Drink more coffee, eat more healthy food. Great idea. I want to read Du Bois. JB, what up, JB? Good to see you, comrade. Yes. I wish I had my speaker with me. It's still in my car, but I was listening to Du Bois on my way home from a wrestling event. I was listening to On Black Reconstruction, and I had to stop at Walmart and buy a speaker because I was getting so into Du Bois. I was like holding the phone to my ear while I was driving. I'm like, I need an aux cord or a speaker. So I whipped into the nearest Walmart and bought a speaker. Shout out to the Midwestern Marks Patreon supporters for that. And I started listening to On Black Reconstruction. It really is a class analysis, meaning a Marxist dialectical materialist analysis of the American South and of the history of America and the history of the Confederacy and the Union. He breaks down all the different economic classes based on their relations to the means of production. He breaks down what their interests were, as far as like economic and political interests. And, he doesn't explicitly say this is a Marxist or Marxist-Leninist analysis or whatever, though, but it doesn't matter, right? Because he's analyzing the economic classes that exist at the time, and he's analyzing class struggle, which is what? That's Marxism. Parenti does the same thing all the time, right? Parenti he'll talk about Marx like once or twice in all of his books. He'll just name drop Marx, and say Marx said this when it's, and it's usually something that reinforces Parenti's argument. In the assassination of Caesar, the only mention of Marx he gives is to criticize Marx, is to say, I think Marx's analysis of Caesar was wrong. And he argues that Marx got tripped up and didn't have the, proper primary sources to understand what Caesar actually was. Otherwise, he would have supported him. But still, you don't have to say, I'm a Marxist-Leninist and wave around a red flag and wear Ivan Drago on your chest in order to give a class analysis, right? You can give a class analysis and just give it. You don't have to mention Marx at all. It's all about the method. So it's all about the theory, not the people who wrote it necessarily. So yeah, everyone should read Du Bois. There's a reason we call him the founder of American Marxism. I'm late, but great work on the Jubilee video. Thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed me talking about communism on Jubilee. If you haven't yet, go over to the Jubilee YouTube channel. They have 8 million subscribers. Go to their communism versus capitalism video and leave a comment saying communism's awesome. Eddie Liger is awesome. Eddie Liger totally won the Jubilee debate. Communism is the best economic system, and it is our future in America. Because that really affects how the debate is perceived and stuff. So far it's going really good. The comments are quite positive in our direction. So let's go. What's up, Jacob? How's it going? Hello, Comrade Eddie. I saw your tweet about that wrinkled testicle, Robert Service. And all I have to say about that is, yep, that's Robert Service for you. You're exactly right, Jacob. Every time he drops some anti-communist myth in his biography, I'm like, what a wrinkled testicle. Jacob was right. Here I have the book next to me, actually. Yeah, it's a biography, so he goes through the Soviet archives and he goes to a lot of primary sources. So it's interesting, it's still a good biography for getting a rough outlook or a general outline of what Lenin's life was like, especially like his younger life and his family life and things like that we don't usually think about because we're usually reading Lenin's political works. But yeah, every once in a while he'll just drop like an anti-communist myth, or what really bugs me is in the intro, he says Lenin was more driven by rage than he was love for the proletariat. Like, first of all, if you've really read everything Lenin said and read about everything he did, that's a really hard argument to make, right? It's a hard argument to make that he was just driven by pure rage rather than, love for his country and the proletariat. Because he was driven by rage against the monarchy who, had his brother hanged and was extremely repressive and sent him into exile. Yeah, he was, enraged by them and the semi-feudal, semi-capitalist social system that they continually reproduced and stood for and were the ruling class of. But he led the vast majority of the Russian people, the Russian peasants and the proletariat, including, and that means the peasants who at the time many people were arguing were backwards and racist and a basket of deplorables, the same way you hear liberals talk about American workers today. Lenin stood up for them and said, no, the peasants are an oppressed social class economically based on their relation to the means of production. And the only way to have a revolution in this semi-feudal, semi-capitalist country is with the worker-peasant alliance. So, there's abundant evidence that Lenin's love for the proletariat was equal to his rage against the ruling class. And his rage against the ruling class was justified and motivated by his love for the proletariat, who the ruling class was oppressing. Right, so that doesn't make any sense. But also, you're claiming to be a historian, like this rigorous historian, this no bullshit historian who dug through the Soviet archives to find, cut through the bullshit. And then you're gonna drop a statement like a moralizing, completely improvable statement, like Lenin's hatred for the ruling class was greater than his love for the proletariat. How do you quantify that, Robert Service? How do you quantify that? But of course, Robert Service is a British historian, so you can drop stuff like that, things that are obviously untrue, but that are accepted as true in the West. Or you can drop, just random anti-communist speculation and moralizing, and people in the West are like, ooh, his editors and publishers are like, ooh. Of course, Lenin was driven by rage. We could never prove that, but people in the West think it's true due to decades of propaganda, so might as well put it in my history book. And other people have criticized Service for that, better Marxists. Well, one thing we've talked about now, as I've been sharing what I've learned from this biography with Carlos and Noah, is it'd be really awesome to commission a Marxist biography of Lenin. To have somebody who's a Marxist-Leninist like do a deep dive into the Soviet archives and do a bunch of research on Lenin's life. But yeah, if anyone's interested in that and wants to do it for like $10, hit me up. YouTube rewards stupidity. Smart people like Eddie are not welcome. Thank you, Battle Kozak. You're true. I was talking about that with my friends this week. I'm like, dude, YouTube is like, it's cool. I like YouTube, but it's so much about clickbait. It's so much about having clickbait titles and clickbait thumbnails and manipulating people to basically give them ADD and make them want to click on your video because you have some clickbaity title or because you have an attractive girl in the thumbnail or something. And it's like, it's whatever. Like we got to use. It is what it is. So we got to manipulate those things to try and boost our content and get our more important content out there. But I think, like, what is this doing to the youth? What is this doing to kids who spend all day on their iPads scrolling through YouTube and just all these clickbaity thumbnails trying to grab their attention? It's like no wonder they struggle to read. No wonder kids struggle to pay attention in school. We have this attention economy where people are just fighting for their attention so they can sell advertising space. So. Yeah, thank you so much, Battle Kosag, though. I mean, YouTube may not reward us, but our super chatters do. We're always getting super chats from you, Battle Kosag, straight from Argentina. Got some euros from Deziga here, and got some more euros for Ross Iron Coil. So, Ross Ian Coil, not Iron. If you want to support us, because these super chats are fantastic. We appreciate all your super chats. Those help to fund the Midwestern Marx Institute. Couldn't do it without them. But YouTube does take a percentage. If you want to fund us directly or pretty much directly, patreon.com/MidwesternMarx is the best way to do so. You get access to Carlos's book, The Purity Fetish, if you're a $10 patron. You get access to our Discord if you're $1. We might open up the Discord to the public soon, just FYI. I don't want to do false advertising, but yeah, lots of stuff on the Patreon. So check it out. Oh, thank you so much, Ross. I haven't even read the super chat though. I read half of the Robert Service book. It was the last historical bio I ever read. It's pants. It turned me off. It turned me right off history. I used to only read historical bios. Yeah, it's not great. You know, I like reading stuff I disagree with, though. I don't mind reading stuff that's filled with anti-communist myths. We'll see, though. Right now, I'm just reading about Lenin's early life, like his childhood, early childhood. So we'll see how I feel once I get to the part where they're actually talking about Lenin's political career, you know. Got to get a girl on Midwestern Marks. We do. We have girls on staff and girls who write for us. Just no one who's like, you know, as involved as Noah, Carlos, and I. But all right, that's I feel like we've had a good discussion of New Year's. That took us up to the 20-minute point. Let's talk about a TikTok that was shared from Sebastian, who's a member of the Midwestern Marks production team. Obviously, I've been following, or I have studied the American healthcare system pretty closely. I took a bunch of classes in healthcare administration at the graduate level, and wrote a big, long research paper about the state of the American healthcare system and capitalist healthcare for the Journal of American Socialist Studies 2, which people can check out on MidwesternMarks.com. But this is just one of the more recent developments in the evolution of the capitalist healthcare system we have in America.
Something very concerning has been happening in the U.S. healthcare system over the last several years, and not enough people are paying attention. Private equity firms have acquired more than 200 acute care hospitals in the United States, and early evidence shows that when a private equity firm acquires a hospital, there are increased charges to patients, reduced staffing, increased use of profitable services, and a decreased proportion of patients on Medicare. All of those things together result in an increase.
Which should be obvious, right? I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say because I've studied healthcare so much, like really intensively. It's hard to say what's obvious to people and what's not. But if a private equity firm is acquiring a hospital, right, rather than maybe like a nonprofit owning the hospital, which, you know, there's still tons of problems with nonprofit hospitals. There are still executives at nonprofit hospitals who are raking in huge salaries, and therefore designing their healthcare, providing of healthcare in a way that maximizes profit over public good, or prioritizes profit over public good. But if, you know, a nonprofit at least has some obligation to serve the public, right? Legal obligation and moral obligation to serve the public. That's what they're expected to do. That's why they are able to file as nonprofits, and call themselves charities and nonprofits. And a lot of hospitals are like that and owned by those kinds of organizations. But if you have a private equity firm take over these hospitals, it's just going to be the profit incentive, and the prioritizing of profit over public health is just going to be doubled. Right? They're just going to do everything that they can to minimize costs and maximize income, which is not always what's in the best interest of the public and in the best interest of the healthcare patients. So by example, this is one of the most obvious examples in the whole of the healthcare system. C-section births, where they cut open the mother's stomach and pull the baby out that way, or not the stomach, but it's like towards the bottom of the tummy area. They cut it open and pull the baby out. There are extra dangers in that procedure, both for the mom and for the baby, right? Yet C-section births are over 30% of births now, or 30% of all births or so are C-section now. And that's not because women need C-section births and the doctors are prescribing them based on need. It's just because it makes a lot more money for the hospitals and the equity firms that own the hospitals, literally. And this has been written about in mainstream medical publications as well. It's a well-known problem that the percentage of C-sections is going up simply because the hospital can charge you more money to perform a C-section than a regular birth. So this kind of structure at the core of the capitalist healthcare system is leading to all the ill effects of the healthcare system that we see, like over 100 hospitals in rural areas shutting down because it's not profitable enough to bring healthcare to those areas. or the 40,000 people who are dying because they don't have insurance, because they don't have access to healthcare in America every single year. The fact that 60% of Americans, 60% experience medical debt at some point in their life. Our healthcare system that's supposed to keep people well is inducing 60% of the country with debt, which traps people in, financial shackles and causes all sorts of psychological torment and stress that can lead to negative health issues, mentally and physically. Our healthcare system induces 60% of the country with that, right? And that is because our system is broken at its core. It's a system motivated by profit rather than public good. And of course, the socialist position should be that all healthcare should be made public, right? Medicare for all makes the insurance industries public. The policy that Bernie Sanders proposed or popularized makes the health insurance industry public, and that would be better. That's what a lot of countries like Sweden have, or I don't know the exact structure of Sweden, but different European countries have that. Australia as well, I believe. But we need to go a step further. The ambulance companies need to be public. The companies who sell medical equipment need to be public. The hospitals need to be public. The doctor's offices need to be public. They shouldn't be run like private businesses that prioritize profit over public good. But as we see in this video, we're going the opposite direction, right? And the entire field of medicine, all the scholarship about medicine these days recognizes that the system is broken. If you take a healthcare administration class or get a master's degree in healthcare administration, like I was doing for a year, they're going to teach you that the system is broken, right? You're going to be doing assignments where you analyze the system and propose solutions to all the problems that are facing the system. And the solution is to move towards socialism, is to move towards a public system that prioritizes use value over exchange value, which is how I wrote about it in my scholarly journal article about this topic. But basically, that just means prioritizing the public good and prioritizing the patients above making profits off the patients. And we do that by not having a capitalist system, but by having a publicly owned system, a socialized system, even though socialized medicine has become a scare word in the U.S. due to propaganda. But are we moving towards socialized medicine? And what I argue for in my Journal for American Social Studies article? No. And in fact, we're moving the opposite way, right? Because there can be all these scholarly articles about how profit incentive screws up the healthcare system and screws the patient, right? And there are plenty of scholarly articles about that. There are plenty of scholarly articles about how pharmaceutical companies lied the entire nation into an opioid crisis and got millions of people addicted to opioids. Everyone knows that this happened, right? But how do we punish these people? Well, you need to take the pharmaceutical companies and make them public. Well, who's going to do that? The government's not. The government's controlled by these pharmaceutical companies. So we're going the opposite direction that we should be. Rather than making the healthcare system less profit-based, we're making it more profit-based. Private equity firms are taking more and more and more of the healthcare system. And nonprofits are being pushed out by private equity firms. So things are only going to get worse. They are only going to get worse. They're not going to build more rural hospitals, right? After 100 rural hospitals have gone bankrupt in the last decade, there's going to be less. And they're going to just concentrate on selling really expensive specialist care in really wealthy areas where they can make the most money. Uh-oh, I talked so long, the video froze.
Increased net income for the hospital. In other words, profits over patients. Up until very recently, nobody had examined how patient care is affected by private.
Come on. Should I restart it? Let's see, we're at like 40 seconds.
Something
Come
very
on, internet.
concerning is equity acquisition of hospitals. This paper came
Okay. I just don't want to miss anything.
Recently, nobody had examined how patient care is affected by private equity acquisition of hospitals. This paper came out yesterday, December 26th, and found that when a private equity firm acquires a hospital, there is a 25.4% increase in hospital-acquired conditions. This 25% increase was driven by an increase in falls and an increase in central line associated bloodstream infection.
Okay, this is exactly what I'm talking about, you guys. So what did I just say? I just said that the medical literature tells us explicitly that the healthcare system is broken and that profit is being prioritized over patients and over public health. Right? The medical literature is very clear about this. You can't be an honest academic, an honest intellectual, and look at the American healthcare system and think that it's working, right? And whenever there's a study done like this that measures the success of private hospitals versus public hospitals, it always comes out with results like this, right? When private equity firms acquire these hospitals, there's more or far less safety for the patients. They're far more likely to fall or contract the disease while they're at the hospital. And this is because they're cutting costs. They're cutting down on patient safety. Because if they have to pay for something that keeps the patient safe, that means less profit. That means less income, right? So they're just going to get rid of that and take their chances with the patient getting hurt. Let the patient get screwed. Who cares? We need to maximize our profits, right? And the medical literature confirms stuff like this, but what are we doing about it? Right? Is the government looking at the literature here and saying, well, it seems that public hospitals are far better for the patients and for public health than private hospitals and hospitals owned by private equity firms. So we should make the healthcare system public. No, they're not doing that. More and more and more nonprofits and public health institutions are being privatized, are being liberalized. They're being taken by giant shareholders who know nothing about healthcare, who are cutting costs in order to increase profits. And this is just the accumulation and concentration of capital. This is neoliberalism at work, right? And it's going to take a revolutionary bottom-up movement to change this. Right? It's going to take a movement of people from the bottom demanding that the healthcare industry be seized and made public, and that these ghouls on Wall Street stop making millions and billions and bajillions of dollars in profit off of getting Americans in, or putting Americans in debt because they get sick, or making them sick with the opioids and other bullcrap that they sell us. And I cover the opioid aspect of the American healthcare system and how the Sackler family and other pharmaceutical companies lied America into the opioid crisis in the Journal of American Socialist Studies 2, where I wrote like a 20-page research paper about the state of the American healthcare system and the problem at the root, the very root of capitalist healthcare, and use the opioid crisis as one of many examples of the healthcare system prioritizing profit over social good and what's called public health in the field of healthcare administration and in scholarship about healthcare. So that's all in there, and it talks about how the people who perpetrated the opioid crisis have never been held accountable. They're still some of the richest families on earth. They're still lobbying the government and have huge control over public life. They're still profiting off of healthcare. And now, which in the sickening fashion, many of the people who perpetrated the opioid crisis are making money off of opioid rehab facilities, which are, only available to opioid addicts who can afford them, which, of course, most people whose lives have spiraled out of control don't have access or don't have the money to afford a rehab facility. Many people eventually run out of pills and switch to a street drug alternative like heroin. So by the time that happens, there's no chance that you can afford to go to a nice rehab facility that's basically a vacation center for rich addicts. But those rehab facilities are being privatized more and more as well, just like the entirety of the healthcare system. So it's horrible. And there were billions and billions of dollars not only spent on propaganda by the opioid companies, but spent on infiltrating academic institutions, right? Giving huge donations to big medical schools and saying, push opioids, push, I'm trying to think of, now it's, I'm drawing a blank of the main drug that the Sackler sold, Oxycontin, right? Push Oxycontin on people who are dealing with anxiety, people who are dealing with mental health issues. So this was taught to doctors in the medical school throughout the 2000s because of tons of money from the Sackler family and pharmaceutical companies. And opioids were pushed on Americans to the point where we have a horrible, horrible crisis now. So if you want to learn about that in depth, check out the Journal of American Socialist Studies too. I promise you won't regret it. You can get it on paperback or ebook, and I'll love you forever. All right, that was a good segment. Duck Hash Brown's $20 super chat. Holy cow. What a giant and helpful super chat. Thank you, Duck Hash Browns. This is very generous. Of course, Midwestern Marx is the People's Institute. We aren't getting any big dollar donations. As Carlos says, there are no benevolent Chinese billionaires funneling money into the Institute. So all of the Institute's activities and organizing and publishing is funded by you, the viewers, with super chats like this and at patreon.com/MidwesternMarx. So thank you very much. I have both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Those are very profitable diseases, and thank the Lord that I have coverage. Imagine OTC insulin and the good that would do. Glad that Eli Lilly got screwed by Twitter verification fakes. Yes, absolutely. And I talk about insulin and diabetes specifically in the Journal of American Socialist Studies because it's such a huge problem. And of course, you know, so many people are born with diabetes and rely on insulin to survive. And one of my first organizing experiences, one of my first forays into politics came with when I was working for the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2020. And I met a lady, multiple people, but one lady who really inspired me who rations her insulin, right? And when she has extra insulin, she'll give it to people who need it, which I probably shouldn't be saying that because I'm pretty sure it's technically illegal, right? But I learned that people are basically smuggling insulin and just really, really struggling to survive. On top of having diabetes, you know, which comes with all sorts of unique struggles. On top of it, they're having this horrific financial struggle where if they don't make enough money or save enough money, they're going to die. They're going to pass away. And Frederick Banting in the Bernie Sanders campaign talked a lot about making insulin affordable and negotiating better drug prices and things like that. And they brought up that Frederick Banting, the inventor of insulin, and I also had viral TikToks about this, sold the patent for $1. He sold the patent for $1 and said, insulin doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the world, right? Nobody should make a profit off of this because it's going to save so many lives and help so many amazing, talented, wonderful, productive people who have diabetes live more productive lives and safer and healthier lives. So I shouldn't be making profit off this. I'll sell it for $1. Now all these giant drug companies have, you know, gotten a hold of the patent. And, you know, patents are another thing that I discuss in depth in the Journal of American Socialist Studies too, because there's an intellectual property regime that healthcare companies use to maximize their own profits and prevent generic versions of drugs being produced. They've gained the patent on insulin and, you know, they're preventing anybody from producing a cheaper version of insulin, or they prevent people from importing cheaper versions of insulin from, say, Canada. And they use trade deals and intellectual property to do this, but it drives up the price and maximizes their profit. But they're profiting off of people who are born with a disease or people who rely on a certain kind of medicine or a certain drug to survive. So it's just horrible how they've taken this public good, or what should be a public good, and, you know, walled it off using intellectual property laws, using the legal system, the capitalist bourgeois legal system, to get a monopoly on the production of this drug, and use it to make profit. And in the Journal of American Social Studies too, I'm really proud of that essay I wrote in JAS 2. It's one of the best things I've ever done. I don't know if anybody cares about healthcare, but if you do, please read it. I talk about how the intellectual property regime, the intellectual property laws that are used to maximize drug costs, were used to prevent countries in the global south from making a COVID vaccine, right? The Western pharmaceutical companies walled off their vaccine recipe so other countries couldn't use it. And of course, Cuba ended up creating their own vaccine, which they then couldn't distribute because there was no way to get syringes because of the embargo, which shows you the effects of the U.S. embargo on Cuban healthcare. But all these countries were prevented from having the vaccine. So while the pharmaceutical companies here at home were saying, take the vaccine, take the vaccine, take the vaccine. You're a piece of shit if you don't take the vaccine. You're going to get suspended from your job if you don't take the vaccine. You're a fascist if you don't take the vaccine. They were preventing countries in the global south from getting the vaccine. Not just preventing them from importing it, but preventing them from making it too, using patent law, using intellectual property law. And that was enforced by the World Health Organization, and the World Trade Organization, the WTO, which are nothing but arms of Western capital and Western healthcare corporations and shareholders, who would prevent these countries from making the vaccine that they were touting as this cure-all that everybody needs to take. That they were saying you're a fascist if you don't take. So that's about the biggest. That is number one bullshit, as Khabib Nurmagomedov would say. This is number one bullshit. Thanks for the awesome content, Eddie. I'm from China and have been living in the U.S. for more than a decade. Hopefully we can see you visit China sometime soon. Thank you so much, Caspian. Another $20 super chat. The big money super chats are rolling in. Really appreciate you all for that. That's how we fund everything we do here at the Institute. A while back, you guys funded my trip to Los Angeles to do that Jubilee video, which now has over 500,000 views and has brought a bunch of new people into Midwestern Marx. And eventually, Carlos and I have been planning this since we started Midwestern Marx. We want to go to China. We just want to visit China, hang out, basically make it like a vacation. Maybe meet up with some comrades over there. Maybe do some studying. I don't know. We could make a whole thing out of it. But one of our main goals at the Institute is to travel to China. Maybe when I'm done competing, I've got like 4 years or so left in me of competing in wrestling. But maybe before that, maybe I'll get a break from wrestling and we'll go to China. Or maybe we'll find a place for me to train wrestling in China and we'll go travel. But I'd love to visit. For those who don't know this, I've told this story a lot, but one of my politics professors in college, I got my bachelor's in politics. He was a Marxist who had studied in China, had studied for like 6 months in China and had spent a lot of time over there. And he told me a lot about how it changed his whole perspective, right? How he realized there could be a different way of organizing society and a different way of living, and how he saw the successes of socialism and socialist economic planning in China. And it really opened his mind. I've also talked to Toxic Bunny, a girl who was on the Jubilee video with me, who had spent a lot of time in China. And she's like, yeah, all my friends who have the option to live in China or the U.S. choose to live in China, which is not many. It's really, really hard to get dual citizenship, she was telling me. And, China doesn't just give citizenship to anyone. It's hard because they actually take care of their citizens. So they have to be careful how many people they just let in. But yeah, either way, I want to visit so bad. I want to see China up close and personal, read in Chinese libraries, speak to Chinese people, meet with Communist Party of China members, all that stuff. I've read so much about it at this point. It'd be awesome. So thank you so much, Caspian, for the $20 super chat. Can't even say how much I appreciate that. Thank you all for the super chats. If you had 5 big super chats today, I really appreciate that. If you want to help the Institute and not have YouTube take a percentage of your money, patreon.com/MidwesternMarx is the place to do that. There are plenty of perks for our patrons. You could also become a YouTube member or a Twitch subscriber. The perks that you get for each are pretty much the same. I have 24 messages on my Patreon account. I got to check that. I'm sorry, patrons, for not getting back to you. I promise I will soon. All right. Yes, and check out the Journal of American Socialist Studies too. All right, I have to go to the bathroom, but I will play a video for you all. While I do go to the bathroom. So it's only an intermission. We're not going anywhere quite yet. We got a whole nother segment to do, and I'm excited to do it, but I do have to pee. However, I'm going to pull up a real exciting video for you guys to watch during the intermission. Real exciting. Let's see here. All right, fam. This isn't right. This isn't me. Shoot. I was going to play a video of me wrestling. Here we go. Here it is. Enjoy. I'll be right back. If I can get this to work. Gosh, why are my videos being annoying today? This is not the vibes, folks. Just kidding. We're going to get it to work. Don't worry. Don't you worry. All right. Hopefully it loads. I got to go, though. Is it loading? Is it working? Did I win? Of course not. Why would Flow Wrestling ever work? Whatever. Not concerned. Sorry you guys don't get to watch me wrestle today. I guess I just need to download all the videos of me wrestling. What's up, folks? Absinthe music. This looks like a bot. What up, fellow chatter? Yes. Someone needs to flood my Twitch chat with bots. Everybody watches the stream on YouTube. We need to get our Twitch numbers up. I thought Hassan Piker might have me on his show, but he just reacted to me on Jubilee and then never got back. He was like, Eddie's good at doing socialist talking points, but I believe all the bourgeois propaganda I've been told about North Korea. Yuck, yuck, yuck. I'm Hassan Piker. And I'm like, let me on your show, Hassan. You'll play freaking Among Us with AOC, but you won't talk to an actual comrade? You'll play Among Us with somebody who went to the Met Gala, but you won't play Among Us and talk with a working class wrestler guy? Man, what the conservatives say about you must be true. You must be stuck up LA guy. You've joined the bourgeoisie by buying a house. Just kidding, Hassan. Have me on your show, though. Have me on. Okay, I just closed my stream plan for today because I'm an idiot. All right, I've got it open. Let's talk about John Pilger. Not to make everybody sad. Because, I mean, it is sad that we've lost John Pilger because he was still on the cutting edge of journalism, still publishing fantastic pieces of journalism about Julian Assange, about the national security state, about suppression of journalism in the Western so-called liberal democracies. Right, so it is sad that we lost him because he was still doing such great work and still involved in the ideological struggle and the struggle against imperialism. But I also think, when someone like this dies, especially once, he lived to the age of 84, we should celebrate what they did when they were here on Earth, right? We should celebrate his achievements. We should celebrate everything that he accomplished and everything that he published because he truly was a great journalist. He was a thorn in the side of the British and American ruling classes and someone who was keenly aware of how the mainstream media works, how the establishment works to propagate certain narratives and how they are able to indoctrinate the public with various ideas. So Here's him with Julian Assange. He was a staunch advocate of Assange, like I said. I did many TikTok videos using John Pilger as the basis for my work or for the video itself. I'm going to open up a tribute that I did to John Pilger on my TikTok here in a minute. But I also want to show his filmography because along with being a prolific journalist and writing a lot of great articles, he was an even more prolific filmmaker. And, you know, film as a medium, like writing is great and articles are great, but film is a medium that can teach people who, you know, wouldn't necessarily know about these issues otherwise, right? You can push radical ideas to a wider audience using film sometimes. They can be a really powerful vehicle for getting information across and, you know, getting a message across. And look at all the films that John Pilger published or put together. And then also think about all the things that he chose to do films about, right? This is stuff that Marxists, Leninists, anti-imperialists, socialists, communists, leftists of all stripes should care about, right? Vietnam, Conversations with a Working Man, Vietnam, Palestine, Powerful British and American Families, Cambodia, the bombing of Cambodia and the genocide in Cambodia perpetrated by Henry Kissinger and the American political establishment during the Vietnam War, the war on so-called Indochina, right? More on Cambodia, East Timor, Vietnam, so-called Burma, the South African apartheid, Iraq, right? These are the core anti-imperialist causes of John Pilger's time were the things that he was publishing films about. And this was before the 2003 intervention in Iraq. This movie is about the U.S. sanctions on Iraq that killed an estimated 500,000 children and left Iraq's infrastructure in what the New York Times described as a near-apocalyptic pre-industrial state. Right, so this is an analysis of that. But these are all the core anti-imperialist topics that any Marxist-Leninist theorist or any communist should care about. So he published films that are very useful for us as socialists and as anti-imperialists that reveal the machinations of capitalist imperialism that drive all of the horrific interventions and horrific things that we see around the world. So check out John Pilger's films. Check out his filmography if you haven't yet. I'm sure a lot of people in my audience are familiar with John Pilger and his work. Here's my tribute to him that I did on the talk.
Man, in all the excitement of the New Year's celebrations, I missed some tragic news on December 31st. One of the world's greatest filmmakers and journalists, John Pilger, has passed away at the age of 84. And since Mr. Pilger passed, tributes have been pouring out from people who respected his work, like George Galloway here. And I just wanted to give mine, because this is someone whose journalism I deeply respected and someone who I used as a source for many of my videos here on this platform. He was a staunch advocate of Julian Assange and journalistic freedom, and he wrote scathing critiques of the Western governments that call themselves liberal democracies yet persecute journalists like Assange. Pilger was also a prolific filmmaker whose movies cut through the establishment lies about issues like the Israel-Palestine conflict or the U.S. war in Vietnam. Pilger's films were a constant thorn in the side for American imperialists who tried to either justify or cover up their horrific crimes. Many mainstream media outlets have been remembering him for his Cambodia coverage, which revealed the U.S.'s horrible bombing campaign, which was led by Henry Kissinger, who had instructed U.S. military forces to unalive anything that moves. The loss of John Pilger is truly a loss for the entire world. He was still at the cutting edge of journalism, even in his old age. And now it's time for the young people who were inspired by the work of John Pilger to step up and try to fill his place. We need to continue his legacy and grow an anti-imperialist movement that can bring an end to all the horrific wars we see around the world. wars which are perpetrated for capitalist expansion and accumulation. Rest in peace, John Pilger.
Yep. Death is sad, but death is a part of life. Everybody dies at some point. And the loss of John Pilger is tragic, but he also lived a very full life where he published a lot of fantastic films and a lot of fantastic articles and did a lot of great journalism and inspired a lot of people. Right? So if you were inspired by John Pilger, you should try to carry on his legacy, fill the void that he's leaving behind. Expose the imperialists and the ruling class for what they are. So rest in peace, John Pilger. He was great at that. He inspired a lot of people. He taught me a lot of things. So shout out to him and rest in peace. Much love to his family. And he's a true hero. He should be remembered as such. There should be a John Pilger Award for journalism. He lives on through his work. Absolutely. That's the best way to put it. Absolutely. A lot of those films are short films. Don't forget the attention span. Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, so I want to play one more TikTok. I want to do a full breakdown of On-Zionist Literature by Ghassan Kanafani at some point. I did one for Danny Shaw's Educate Against Genocide class about the Palestinian struggle. And I'll probably take the video recording of my lecture in Danny's class and upload it as a YouTube video on its own at some point. Or I'll just kind of redo the analysis and breakdown of On-Zionist Literature that I did for that class, which is in my little notebook here. Shout out to the Revolution Report and Donald Corder, who gave me this notebook when I spoke at their conference in Chicago in, when was that? It was last year in like October or something. I can't exactly remember, but shout out to them for that. Kind of off topic, but either way, did a full breakdown of On-Zionist Literature that I want to go through. But one thing that I kept thinking as I'm reading this work and reading Kanafani's other work, like Men in the Sun and all these great works of Palestinian resistance, is that he was killed. He was killed at the age of 31 by the Israeli Mossad, by the Israeli occupation, by Israeli intelligence, by imperialism. And it's like, how many more pivotal works would he have published if he wasn't killed at that young age? Right? Not just works like this on Zionist Literature, which was a work he was commissioned to do by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, his political party. They said, analyze Zionist literature and Zionist novels and understand why the Zionists are so good at narrative control and propaganda and how they've tricked so many people into supporting their occupation, ethnic cleansing, and expulsion of Palestinian Arabs. Right, so he does this systematic analysis, and it's absolutely brilliant and incredibly useful politically for Palestinians in the struggle. All right, but not only that, but he was a novelist. Right, he would write historical fiction, or he would write books about the Palestinian experience that were like narratives, like storybooks almost, about that would help people understand the life of Palestinians who had been expelled from their villages and from their homeland by Israel, because he himself was expelled by the Zionist forces when he was a child from his homeland in Palestine. So he understood that experience better than anyone else. And he had the education and the intellect and the capacity to write about it and put it into words and put it into narrative form in a beautiful way. So what does Israel do? They kill him. They massacre, or I guess a massacre is when they kill a lot of people, but they've massacred the Palestinian intelligentsia, Palestinian academics, right? Anybody who has this great intellect and an ability to write things that motivate people to struggle for Palestine, and that bring Palestinians together, give Palestinians a shared sense of culture, right? Those are the people who Israel specifically targets for assassination, right? And that's why we describe this as an ethnic cleansing. Right? Because that's what it is. It's trying to remove these people from their land, trying to mow the grass and keep the population low. But also, it's the destruction of Palestinian culture and heritage and history. And you hear Zionists like Dr. Eli David on Twitter, a disgusting, idiotic Zionist who, I don't know why he calls himself a doctor. I don't know what he's a doctor of. He doesn't do anything except sit on Twitter all day and tweet about Israel. So clearly he's not a very busy doctor. But either way, one of the things he loves to say is, what have Palestinians ever produced? What have Palestinians ever created? Palestinians have created some of the greatest literature of all time, douchebag. Some of the greatest literature of all time. That's why you guys killed them. That's why you guys killed them. So you could sit on Twitter and say, oh, the Palestinians never produce anything. They don't produce any great art and literature. Yeah, they do. Kanafani did. That's why you killed him and his niece in a car bomb, you idiot. And earlier this year, the great Palestinian poet and writer, Rafid Alarir, was killed by Israel. And he got a letter from the Israeli Mossad before he was killed saying, we are going to kill you. Right? So he left his family and friends because he's a hero and he didn't want to bring anyone down with him. But then Israel killed him. Because why would we let the Palestinians have art? Why would we let the Palestinians have culture? Right? We have to exterminate that because the Israeli government is a fascist ethno-nationalist government that is trying to ethnically cleanse Palestinian Arabs. So here's a TikTok video I did about this subject.
Racist Zionists love to say the Palestinians have never produced anything. What have they ever created? When the Zionists have been systematically murdering all of the great minds and thinkers out of Palestine for the last 70 years. I just finished a book from the legendary Palestinian author and journalist Ghassan Kanafani, and I have another one on its way in the mail. Okay, this man was a genius. He was a beautiful fiction writer and a brilliant academic, and Israel killed him, along with his niece, in a car bomb because he didn't support Israel, because Israel expelled him from his home when he was just a child, just like they expelled 75% of the Palestinian population at the time. And if you think that they've stopped doing stuff like this, you would be wrong. In fact, earlier this year, an Israeli missile targeted and killed the Palestinian poet Rifat Alarir. And you see, Israel loves killing the Palestinian artists, the Palestinian intelligentsia, because these people are able to mobilize resistance with their art, and they give the Palestinians a shared sense of culture. And that's what the Israelis want to destroy, because this is truly a project of ethnic cleansing. They don't want the Palestinians to produce art and culture, so they systematically take out the Palestinian artists. It's one of the sickest things imaginable. They're just trying to destroy an entire culture of people so they can take their land. It's sick.
All right, massacring the intelligentsia, and as Uno and Julie have already pointed out in the chat, the Israelis will also take Palestinian cultural productions and claim them as their own and say these are Israeli. So they appropriate Palestinian culture, they kill Palestinian artists, and then they sit on Twitter and say we should be allowed to genocide these people. They don't produce anything. Yes, they do. You just either steal it or kill the people producing things. So it's the most sick and twisted thing, and the Israelis have really mastered propaganda. I mean, truly, Joseph Goebbels, the famous Nazi propagandist, would be very jealous of what the Israelis have been able to do in convincing people to support their apartheid and their systematic ethnic cleansing of Palestinian Arabs. And oops, almost knocked my mug over. But that's why I'm going to do a full breakdown of this book, because it is truly incredible. It looks at the roots of not just the Zionist movement, but Zionist propaganda and Zionist literature, which existed far, far, far before the state of Israel existed. And Kanafani traces this Jewish literature, this ancient religious Jewish literature, and shows how the Israelis have taken it and manipulated it, mined it for quotes, or transformed it into Zionist literature. So they take these Jewish religious stories and Jewish religious character archetypes, like the archetype of the wandering Jew, which had been a character in Jewish literature for a long time, and it was a religious character, and they transformed that into a Zionist character. So the wandering Jew in Zionist literature is no longer wandering once he settles in Israel, once he joins the IDF. Right. So for years, there had been this religious character archetype of the Jew who deals with oppression and wanders the earth and questions God and challenges God, but ultimately, reconciles with God and accepts his faith. That was the wandering Jew character. When the Zionists take over the literature, now you have this wandering Jew character who's no longer wandering once he settles in Israel, once he goes home. Right. And this had never been part of Jewish religious literature before. Right. This was something that the Zionists did with Jewish literature. This is the way they manipulated and mined Jewish literature for things that could help their political narrative. And it's, brilliant because Jewish kids grow up reading these stories and reading Zionist books like Exodus, right, which is supposed to be the history of the founding of the state of Israel, but even people in Israel recognize it's not a very good history. It's mostly just good for tricking Americans into supporting Israel, and coincidentally, it was turned into a movie a few years after it was published in 1960. But this book tries to tell the story of the founding of Israel, but basically, the Arabs are just hopelessly backwards and waiting to be expelled, whereas the Zionists are heroes. They're heroic in founding their homeland. And anytime the book Exodus has to talk about the expulsion of Palestinians from their homeland, the expulsion of the indigenous people, it just deflects to the Holocaust. It says, well, Jews were cleansed in the Holocaust, so they're not welcomed in Europe, and we should be able to have Palestine. You say, well, what about the Palestinians who are already there, who are being pushed off of their homes, who are being pushed out of their villages, pushed off their land? They say, well, the Holocaust. The Holocaust happened to Jews. We have to, right? So it's always two wrongs make a right, is the argument that the Zionist literature always falls back on. Maybe I'll get into this book now. Screw it. So the Zionist literature also weaponizes Hebrew. So there's an explicit goal of the Zionists, who eventually become a well-oiled political machine with lots of big money behind them. They need to turn Hebrew into an actual language. Previously, Hebrew was just used for Jewish religious matters and was found in Jewish religious texts. But they needed to turn it into an actual language that could stand on its own, so that they could argue that Jews are not a religion, right, but a nation. Because before that, there was no real argument that the Jewish people constituted their own nation, that they had their a shared sense of geography, economic life, and a shared language, which are the things that usually constitute a nation. So in order to make this argument, the Zionists had to elevate the religious language of Hebrew to a language of its own. And this is what they tried to do, was mine Jewish religious texts, Jewish religious literature, and transform it from religious literature into nationalistic literature. That's what the project of Zionism has always been about, especially Zionist literature. Political Zionism, Kanafani argues, is rooted in literary Zionism. Literary Zionism well preceded the establishment of political Zionism at the conference in Basel, Switzerland in 1987. So there were, Jewish literature was being transformed into Zionist literature, into nationalistic literature, well before political Zionism was officially established. So he also makes the argument that the Jewish people who were pushing nationalism, who were pushing Zionism, were the wealthy ones, the bourgeoisie, right? The socioeconomic elites. And there were a lot of Jewish people who were pushing for social integration, who were saying, no, we should integrate into European societies, right? We should integrate and join these societies and still keep our religious customs. But, there's nothing that says that we can't live in Europe, that we can't live peacefully here. And what the Zionists do is accept the same premise as the Nazis and say, no, social integration is impossible. Jewish people cannot integrate into Europe. And therefore, we need to go to Palestine and found our own state. Right? So Zionism accepts the exact same philosophical underpinnings of Nazism. The idea that Jewish people cannot integrate into Western societies, so they need to go found their own ethno-state and push Palestinians off the land. So we see here in Kanafani the importance of a class analysis. And this is why Kanafani is so valuable in his analysis of Zionism, because he was involved in the struggle. Right? He was expelled from his home by the Zionists, and he joined a Marxist-Leninist political party to struggle against it. So he has a perspective that's so valuable for Westerners as somebody involved in the struggle against apartheid and ethnic cleansing and capitalist imperialism. And he gives us a Marxist class analysis of the growth of Zionism and says that the socioeconomic elites pushed Zionism and nationalism in the Jewish communities and suppressed those who were pushing for social integration. Those who were saying, no, there's nothing, we don't have to accept the philosophy of the Nazis that says we're not allowed to live in Europe as Jews. So Zionism, the argument that Jews give is that, the argument that Zionists give is that Jews were driven out of Europe by the Holocaust, and that's true, and Jews were driven to Zionism by the Holocaust. In many ways, that's true, right? The Zionist argument that we need our own state, we need a safe place for Jews, was strengthened by the horrific oppression and ethnic cleansing of Jews that was going on in Europe, right? But at the same time, the ones who were really pushing nationalism and the ones who were really pushing Zionism pre-1948 were the socioeconomic elites of the Jewish community, right? It wasn't working class Jewish people. It was the Jewish elites, the people with the money and the power who could push this really shoddy scholarship, this really shoddy Zionist literature that manipulated Jewish literature and turned it into a political, nationalistic, imperialistic project, which is what Israel is. And again, it's an inversion of the Nazi ideology that was so popular at the time. And those who argued against Zionism within the Jewish community were horrifically suppressed with the money of the socioeconomic elites. So in the 1800s, racism was decreasing, and these ideas of equality were increasing. So what the Zionists responded to with these narratives of equality and the idea that different religious and ethnic groups can live together in the same state and in the same civilization was resisted by the Zionists, who responded with a narrative of Jewish supremacy, right? Saying, no, that Jews actually can't integrate into European society. They need their own homeland where they can basically have an ethno-state and flourish. It's so close to Nazi ideology, you guys. Once you actually look at the philosophical underpinnings of Zionism, you realize it is fascism. It's just an inverted form of fascism, right? The philosophical underpinnings are the same as Nazism. There are a lot of examples that push this idea of Jewish supremacy and push against social integration. Like Disraeli's Wondrous Tales of Alroy. Disraeli ended up being a Zionist politician, or maybe even the Israeli prime minister. And he published this book pushing this Jewish supremacist ideology, which also started to transform the Jewish hero into a Zionist hero, right? So taking the literature from a focus on Jewish people living wherever in the world and the Jewish experience and transforming it into a Zionist experience, saying the Jewish hero is no longer a virtuous person who struggles against oppression and is an upstanding person in their community and serves God, right? That was the Jewish hero in Jewish literature for years. They transformed that into, no, the Zionist hero is someone who, in response to oppression, goes to Israel, pushes the Palestinians off their land, and helps the state of Israel flourish. So over time in Jewish and Zionist literature, you see this transformation. And books like The Wondrous Tales of Alroy by Disraeli that push this Zionist hero narrative are the ones that get funding from the Zionist socioeconomic elites. There's also a book in 1876 by George Eliot called Daniel Deronda, which basically lays out a Zionist plan of action to settle in Palestine for the first time. So explicitly saying this is where we can found a state, and the hero of that book is someone who goes to that state and helps found the state of Israel. Daniel Deronda book is recognized as one of the first times that Jewish characters in a piece of literature discuss a Jewish state explicitly. So this book represented the ideas of this emerging Zionist current of thought, this current of thought in the Jewish community that was being pushed by socioeconomic elites, which at its core rejects integration and pushes an idea of Jewish supremacy. So this book was less overtly racist than other books. It dressed up the Jewish supremacy, the racism, in a humanist mask. But still ultimately rooted in this idea of Jewish supremacy. And what's important about the book Daniel Deronda is it laid out an action plan for the Zionist hero in Zionist literature for the first time. And if you want to know how much this literature was being pushed by wealthy, influential, powerful Zionists, there's a street in Tel Aviv today that's named for Eliot, the author of that book that laid out the Zionist plan of action for the first time. So Zionist literature continues to change Jews from a religious group into a national group with explicit political goals. So the other thing, Kanafani is a Marxist-Leninist. So he understands that literature isn't created in a vacuum, right? There are material conditions that produce literature. There are material conditions that form the author of this literature, right? So his analysis that it was the socioeconomic elites, it was the ruling class, the capitalists, the bourgeoisie who were pushing Zionism and nationalism. That's important. He's talking about the material factors that led to the production of this literature and the explicit political goals of this literature. And he talks about how the material conditions of society are often reflected in art and literature, right? This is the idea of base and superstructure, as it's often called, a conceptual device for explaining how literature and artistic productions are rooted in material conditions and the type of society, the organization of society, how much wealth a person grows up with, how much privilege they grow up with. These all affect a person's experience and affect the kind of art that they'll produce. Even more so than that, the publishers at the time and the people who had the money to push certain kinds of literature were the socioeconomic elites, people with wealth. So at the time in the Jewish community, that was the Zionists, the nationalists, right? They had their own reasons and interests in founding a state in Palestine that they would be in charge of as the socioeconomic elites, right? So the literature at the time reflects the material conditions of the authors of that literature and the people who had the money to push that literature. So this stereotype emerges in Zionist literature. A stereotype hero emerges in Jewish literature of the Zionist hero, who's basically this infallible character, this character who's smarter and wittier and more driven and more disciplined than everybody else around them. And they have the explicit purpose in these stories of founding the state of Israel on top of Palestine. So this kind of literature, again, starts to lay out a plan of action for the Zionists. And this wandering Jew archetype begins to transform into a conqueror, a character who's no longer wandering around and struggling with God, right? The stories no longer focus on the Jewish character's relationship with God and their religion and their community. It now focuses on their mission to conquer Palestine. Right. And this is a transformation that happens over hundreds of years. This wandering Jew archetype goes back hundreds and hundreds of years in Jewish religious literature. And the socioeconomic elites manipulatively took that wandering Jew character archetype and turned it into a Zionist conqueror character archetype, where all of a sudden this wandering Jew is no longer wandering once he gets to Israel. Right, so that's a transformation of a character archetype that happens over hundreds of years in Zionist literature and Jewish literature that Kanafani makes an astute analysis of. So here we see how the religious myths or religious stories or religious texts of the Jewish religion are manipulated by chauvinist, wealthy, nationalistic, fascistic Jews at the time to promote colonization and promote pushing Palestinians off their land. So let me read a passage on page 54 real quick. So this is the wandering Jew figure in a book called The Stranger. It says, this might be actually, let me just read it. Okay. Yes, I am a sinner. I have committed the greatest sin, for I was plowing my field when I should have been taking part in the struggle for the freedom of my people. Now God's terrible punishment is upon me. I shall have to wander all over the world, and long shall I seek the Messiah. Now I go to do what I must. I will search for the Messiah for a long, long time. I will do what I have to do. I will do what I have to do. So basically, this wandering Jew character archetype in the book The Stranger is saying that God is punishing him for not going to Israel and joining the struggle. Right? So you see the effect that this kind of literature being pushed by chauvinistic, nationalistic characters, you can see the effect that had on the Jewish community or on young people. Right? People are reading these stories that with the message and the moral of the story is that God will punish you if you're a Jewish person who doesn't support Israeli nationalism and Zionism. Right. So this is the kind of literature that indoctrinated tons of young people and tons of young Jewish people. And it shows why the Zionists have been so successful in narrative control. Commenting on this theater group, Rakin Ben Ari, a founder of Habima, writes, I still see Zemek, the actor who played the part of the farmer prophet, before me, lifting his bag and staff with a piercing sigh, climbing up to the top of the construction, where exclaimed in a mystic tone of voice, Ani halek el habas et el Messiah. I am going in search of the Messiah. These were not empty words for him. He was always looking for a Messiah himself, for the theater, for the people. He believed in the redemption of his people and hoped that the Habima would bring the problem of the Jew before his eyes of the world. And then moving on from that passage, Kanafani himself comments, this expert precisely summarizes the political instrumentalization of a religious matter. The political instrumentalization of a religious matter. That's a very important concept in this book. It was not a coincidence, as we will see, for politically chauvinistic Jews to have widely promoted this play along with the book Daniel Deronda, which also mixed religion and race under the banner of the national homeland, right? Transforming the Jewish religion into a Jewish nationality so they can make this nationalistic argument for the colonization of Palestine and establishment of Israel. Just within half a century, these three elements established the most grotesque case of settler colonial conquest in modern history, right? So they had to make this argument for Jews as a nation rather than a religion. And in doing so, they manipulated religious literature and turned it into nationalistic Zionist literature, and brainwashed a bunch of people into colonizing Palestine and ethnically cleansing the Palestinians in the name of giving Jewish people a homeland where they can be safe. Which, nobody would argue against Jews having a place where they can be safe and being protected. But you can't have an ethno-state. You can't have an apartheid state where Palestinian Arabs who have been living there for thousands of years aren't welcome. Right? You have to have a civilization where all people can live equally, right? Which is the idea of the Enlightenment, right? And the idea that liberal societies are supposed to be based on. Everybody's equal under the law. And Israel is the only apartheid state left on earth where they say, no, explicitly, you're not equal under the law. You're only given protections if you are a Jewish person. Moving on, that was a fantastic piece there from Kanafani. The end of the wandering Jews' suffering in Zionist literature as opposed to Jewish literature becomes the establishment of the state of Israel. And Theodor Herzl, who was a former Israeli leader and considered one of the founders of political Zionism. He also wrote a piece of literature called The Old New Land. And Kanafani says that this is a qualitative shift where Zionist literature becomes fully and explicitly political. So in Theodor Herzl's book, the whole focus of the book is founding the state of Israel, the colonization of Palestine. And there were organized efforts from the Zionists, which during Herzl's time had become a well-oiled political machine with tons of money behind it. There were tons of efforts to push his book and push his literature and suppress any other literature that argued for social integration of Jews into European society. So again, they pushed the same philosophical premise as the Nazis. So as the political goals of Zionism became increasingly explicit, so too does the falsification of history become increasingly necessary for Zionist authors. So the more they explicitly argue for the colonization of Palestine, the more they need to lie and distort the facts in order to trick people into supporting it. Because of course, they're supporting ethnic cleansing and the expulsion of an indigenous people in order to steal their land at the end of the day. Right? And they can justify that as much as they want, right? And say we need to do this or it's right to do this as much as they want. But the more that they say that, the more they're going to need to lie to justify this. And you see this in Zionist literature. The more explicitly political the literature becomes, the more focused Jewish stories become on founding the state of Israel and ethnically cleansing Palestinians and pushing them off the land, the more the authors of that literature have to lie in order to justify it. It makes perfect sense. And Kanafani says this is due to the contradiction at the core of Zionist ideology, which says it's justified to colonize another people because of the Holocaust or because in response to Jewish oppression, we're going to oppress another group of people. That's the contradiction at the core of Zionism. And in the writing of Zionist literature, that contradiction is expressed through the more explicitly political the literature is, the more that literature is filled with lies. So the book Exodus that I brought up at the beginning of this segment is a perfect example. It is a work of fiction that's taken by many, many Westerners to be the real story, the real history of the founding of Israel. And even Zionists and Israelis have said that book is crude, right? It's not a really good or well-detailed history or a good piece of scholarship. All it's good for, all that Exodus is good for, is convincing Westerners to support Israel, right? And Exodus is also filled to the brim with lies. It's filled to the brim with falsifications, with distortions, right? Which is why even Israelis say it's not that good of a book. But Westerners don't know that. So let's give it to them, and we can trick them into supporting Israel and thinking Israel is just and ignoring the colonization of Palestine. And anytime the book Exodus, which was turned into a movie to further brainwash Westerners in 1960, which is another example of how wealthy elites pushed Zionist art and artistic productions and Zionist literature and movies. What was I saying? That literature is pushed in the West, and Westerners don't know that it's not entirely historically accurate. So screw it. And anytime that book confronts the colonization and expulsion of Palestinian Arabs, all it does is deflect to the Holocaust. Right? It says, well, we should be allowed to do this because we were oppressed in the Holocaust, which is something that, of course, the Arab Palestinians had nothing to do with. So it makes zero sense. The book is riddled with lies, and Norman Finkelstein also shows that in his work, Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine Conflict. He gives a great debunk of Exodus, as I recently did on TikTok as well. And you can go check out that video if you want. But that's because Exodus is explicitly political. It's a whole book that focuses on the colonization of Palestine, and the heroes of that book are the colonizers. So because it tries to make these colonizers the heroes, it needs to use tons and tons of lies and distortions to justify their actions. So the more political the books get, the more they're chock full of lies. The more they have to falsify history. And they also, Kanafani argues that in order to portray Jewish people as a nation rather than a religion, and to portray them as a race, the more they have to give Jews superior characteristics to the Arabs. Right? So they give them these superior characteristics and say these are racial characteristics. These are the racial characteristics of Jewish people that make them superior. And therefore, they should be able to have their own nation on top of Palestine, rather than living in harmony with the Palestinian Arabs who had been there for years. They need to distinguish Jewish people from Arabs and even from Europeans. So in order to do this, the Zionist authors rely on this idea of Jewish supremacy. So again, it's an idea that a certain kind of people can't integrate into European society, and that some people are racially superior to others. Sound familiar? Do the philosophical or the core philosophical ideas of Zionism sound familiar? It's fascism. It's Nazism. Just inverted, in an inverted form, and directed against Palestinian Arabs rather than being directed against Jewish people themselves. So let me read to you a passage on page 65 of this book, which is an analysis, I believe, of the book Exodus that we were just discussing by Leon Uris. So this is on page 65 and 66. Bear with me here as I find it. Okay. There is a novel that cannot be described as anything, this is kind of funny, other than a crude distortion of history, namely Leon Uris's Exodus, which will be discussed at greater length later. And it's also discussed in Norman Finkelstein's Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine Conflict. Yet it is commonly regarded as a historical novel. Let us turn for now to a Zionist authority's discussion of this work, for whom the novel's inconsistencies and contradictions are deemed to be markers of its success and quality. So this is a Zionist talking about the book Exodus by Leon Uris. Okay? It seems to me that there has been, during the last years, only one English Jewish writer who has boldly made this confrontation, rethinking or confronting of the position of the Jew today. And that, surprisingly, is Leon Uris in Exodus. Soon after it had made its first impact in the United States, I asked one of the most representative Israelis what he thought of it. He replied that he forced himself to read it. It was a vulgar book, but a good book for the American Jews. So it's a book that's not very true, but it makes the argument, the case for Israel, really well to uninformed Americans who don't actually know what's going on. I have often thought about that answer and what it really meant. Did he mean that it was just good propaganda? I don't know now, but clearly Uris achieved something much more. He has written a book which has been more widely read by the present generations of American Jews, and probably also of English Jews, than the Bible, and which is better known to the younger generations than the Bible, and largely accepted by it as the authentic version of how the state of Israel came to be established. So he's explicitly saying this book is hogwash. It's a vulgar history or a distortion of history, but it's gotten a ton of Americans to read it and think that it's true, and the ones who think that it's true support Israel. So awesome. Uris put sex, success, and James Bondism into Zionism. He gave the Jewish masses of all income groups the image they had been longing for. He showed them that the new Jew could follow the Gentile pattern and emulate it. He did more. He also confronted the non-Jewish reading public with this image of the new Jew. And outside England, they liked it. So this Zionist character, this new Jewish literary character who's a colonizer, a conqueror, someone who solves his problems not by reconciling with God and getting deeper into the Word of God, but someone who solves their problems by conquering Palestine. The only problem Uris did not manage to overcome is how to reconcile the facts with his fiction. So this guy's saying Uris's book is awesome. If only it wasn't filled with lies, but whatever, at least people believe it. He left that to others. This will not be easy, but it will not be achieved by critics who point to the literary and historical shortcomings of Exodus. However real these may be, admitting that it's filled with crap. For this is the image of Israel that is fixed now more firmly in the mind of generations of our day than that was projected by Herzl, Weizmann, and even Ben Gurion. So, praising this book for how well it tricks people into supporting Israel, and admitting that the book isn't factual. And this is why Norman Finkelstein does an analysis of the book, and I'm pointing to my copy of Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine Conflict, which is over there. And all Finkelstein does is go through the claims made in Exodus, the history given in Exodus, and compares them to reality. And says, look, this book plays so loosely with the facts. It's not based in facts at all. Yet, so many British and Americans, and this author says more British and American people than even have read the Bible, have read this book and think it's true, even though it's nonsense. So Kanafani responds to this and says, a close examination of this quote leads one to an astonishing discovery. If this was written about any other novel, the novel would be regarded as a failure. The points that John Kimchi and others have made about Exodus as positives would by any measure of critique obliterate any other novel. In Kimchi's opinion, the value of Exodus lies in the fact that it has become more ubiquitous than the Bible and that it is now regarded as an official report on Israel's establishment. He claims that the novel did not reconcile the facts with fiction and that it put sex, success, and James Bondism into Zionism. This contradiction does not lead to any reservations. On the contrary, Kimchi calls those who insist on exposing the novel's historical and scientific shortcomings, like Finkelstein, to come to terms with them, all for the sake of maintaining Israel's illusory image in the mind of readers. This is a deception of a peculiar kind. While a prominent Israeli figure regards the book to be vulgar and derivative, he insists that it is great for Jewish Americans. So it's BS, but it's great for tricking Americans into supporting Israel. So it's awesome. What then is the purely artistic measure against which a Zionist work is judged? If everything is justified for the sake of serving a prior conclusion, what is the standard against which the quality of art may be critiqued? And why does Zionist art alone stand as an exception to the established standards of literary criticism? This tendency, above all, is what drives a critic like Mordecai Rickler to state that it has become increasingly attractive for the American Jew to become a novelist and to become controversial and distinctive as well. Committing technical and historical errors can suddenly count as merits, much like what has happened with countless Zionist literary works. All this is due to the contradiction that lies within Zionist ideology itself. I'm going to repeat that. All this is due to the contradiction that lies within Zionist ideology itself and its propagandistic requirement that art must perform directly in the political arena. The Zionist novel is not required, as is the case with other novels around the world, to thoroughly explore the facts. On the contrary, it is required to invent new facts at any cost and then protect them, often by appealing to the guilty conscience of the European critic and his illusory responsibility towards Israel. So weaponization of the Holocaust, saying you have to support our colonization of Palestine. You did the Holocaust towards us, Europeans. So you see, the more explicitly political these books become, the more they have to lie. Exodus is an explicitly political book. The heroes of that book are Zionist conquerors who found the state of Israel and Palestine. And in order to justify that, it needs to use countless lies and distortions of history. And Israeli officials recognize this. They recognize that it's not a good history book, but they love it because Americans and British people are reading it. And when they read it, they're more likely to support the state of Israel and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So almost done here. Oh, actually, I think that's all I had for that book. So yeah, On Zionist Literature by Ghassan Kanafani. I went through it today, but it's really something that people should read. It's so incredibly valuable to read a Marxist analysis of Zionism from somebody deeply involved in the struggle and somebody who saw it firsthand, somebody who was expelled from his home by Zionists and who was killed in a car bomb by Zionists for his excellent work. It's such a valuable piece of work for Marxists and anti-imperialists and socialists like us to read from someone from our own tradition who was there, who was in the struggle, who was in the shit. Right? How valuable? What perspective could be more valuable for us Marxists in America being indoctrinated with Zionist propaganda like the book/movie Exodus? Right? What could be more valuable than hearing one of our comrades involved in the struggle, involved in that specific struggle, debunk and dissect and analyze the historical roots of the propaganda that the ruling class is using in that same struggle? Right, so I really recommend people get On Zionist Literature and Kanafani's other books. Unfortunately, he stopped writing at the age of 31 because the Israeli Mossad killed him and his niece in a car bomb. But we can only imagine how many other amazing works of art and works of literature he would have produced had the fascist state of Israel not killed him for being a luminary. And this is what Israel does. They systematically kill the intellectual and cultural leaders in Palestine. And then they say, oh, the Palestinians have never produced anything. The Palestinians have never created anything. They're so backwards compared to the Israelis. Like, no, they've produced a whole bunch of stuff. And anytime they do, you kill the people producing it. You're the ones who are backwards. You are the ones who are holding humanity back. You're anti-humanity. You're in favor of killing people who have put out some of humanity's greatest works of academia and greatest works of art. Israel can suck it. Eddie Liger. Quote me. It was required reading in 9th grade for me in Alaska. Terrible book. Oh, Exodus was? Wow, very interesting, Aaron Young. Thank you so much for the super chat, Aaron. That's so interesting to hear.
Want to break their ego?
Sorry.
Want to break their ego? Next time you get in an argument?
Hush. I opened up TikTok because I wasn't going to play this video, my specific analysis of Exodus. But since you brought up that you actually had to read Exodus, I think I will. So this is my analysis of the book Exodus specifically, which Norman Finkelstein debunks in his book Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine Conflict, and Kanafani spends a lot of time debunking in On Zionist Literature. So let me see here. Because this book, it's seriously taken as truth, even though it's historical fiction.
The novel Exodus by Leon Uris, which was turned into a movie in 1960, is considered a quintessential work for Westerners who want to understand the history of the founding of Israel. And the problem is that Exodus is a work of historical fiction, and historical fiction can be good and teach us about the past. However, Exodus doesn't represent reality because all of its Jewish characters are heroic conquerors, whereas all of the Arabs in the story are hopelessly backwards and just waiting to be conquered. Additionally, the book celebrates and justifies the founding of the state of Israel without addressing the realities of the Nakba and Palestinian experience expulsion, where about 75% of the indigenous population of Palestine were expelled from their homes. Exodus pretty much just ignores this reality, and whenever it has to confront it, it deflects to the Holocaust, saying the Jews faced oppression in Europe under the Holocaust, so they need to go to a homeland somewhere. And by deflecting to the Holocaust, they're able to obfuscate away from the question of Arab expulsion. So we can learn from historical fiction, but not when it's this deliberately manipulative. But this kind of manipulation is a trend in Zionist literature, as the Palestinian author Ghassan Kanafani points out in his book on Zionist literature. Because of the contradictions inherent in Zionist ideology, Zionist propagandists and authors always have to gloss over the question of the Arab Palestinians. Because there's no real way to justify expelling an indigenous population from their homes en masse, the Zionists need to rely on fabrications and manipulations of the truth. This is something that Norman Finkelstein also shows very well in his book, Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine Conflict. And I highly recommend people check out both of these books. The novel Exodus by...
So there you have it. I don't know if I have anything else to say. On Zionist Literature by Kanafani, check it out. Leon Uranus. Nice. All right, everybody. This has been a great stream. The Power Hour's gone well over an hour. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Patreon.com/MidwesternMarks if you want to support the channel. Shout out to my comrade in arms, Ivan Drago. Break the bourgeoisie. Get out there and organize your workplace. Educate your friends and family. We'll see you on the next stream. Much love and solidarity.
and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.